Michael Henderson's quiet morning turned into chaos when HOA President Karen Wilson ordered neighbors to trample his carefully tended garden without permission. Karen, always the picture of the perfect neighbor, revealed her true nature, wielding authority for control and delighting in others' humiliation. But Michael refused to stay powerless. He gathered evidence, fought back through legal channels, and turned the tables on her. And just wait until you see how this bold stand led to a shocking conclusion where justice in the end finally prevailed. I had been outside since dawn, enjoying the quiet hum of morning in my suburban neighborhood. The air smelled of freshly watered soil and blooming jasmine, and the sunlight filtered through the leaves in dappled patterns on the grass. My hands were covered in dirt as I carefully pruned the roses along the fence, lost in the rhythm of routine work that always brought me a sense of calm. The garden was my sanctuary, a place I poured hours into not just for beauty, but for the peace it gave me. Then it happened. A sudden, loud crash shattered the tranquility. At first I thought a branch had fallen, maybe a tree limb knocked over by the morning breeze. But the crash was followed by voices, raised, harsh, demanding. My heart jumped into my throat. Something was wrong. I dropped my pruning shears and hurried to the edge of the porch, squinting into the sunlight. And then I saw her. Karen Wilson, the president of our HOA, stood in my yard with her usual air of authority, her lips pressed in a thin, deliberate line that always made her look untouchable, untouchably sure of herself. But this time, it wasn't the casual display of control over meetings or neighborhood rules. This time, she had crossed a line I never imagined she would. Neighbors were moving under her direction, almost robotically, and they were trampling over the carefully tended flower beds I had spent weeks nurturing. Petunias, tulips, and the tiny budding roses I had planted just last month were being flattened, their petals crushed beneath the soles of shoes and the heels of boots. It felt surreal, as if I were watching a scene from a nightmare play out in broad daylight. I froze, unable to believe what my eyes were showing me. My brain refused to process it at first. How could anyone, even someone in a position of authority, feel entitled to enter my property without permission? Not once had I given consent. Not once had there been any discussion or warning. They hadn't checked any papers. They hadn't knocked on my door. They had just decided. My own land, the place where I invested so much time and care, had become their stage for demonstrating control. I could feel a mix of disbelief and numbness washing over me. Part of me wanted to run forward, to shout, and stop them before any more damage was done. Another part of me wanted to stand there and try to understand, to convince myself that surely there had been some misunderstanding. But deep down, I knew there was no mistake. This was deliberate. This was a power play, a statement from someone who believed she could override not just rules, but basic respect and decency. As I watched, the realization settled fully in my chest. Heavy and cold, the garden that had always been my refuge was under siege, not by accident or by chance, but by someone wielding authority like a weapon. The shock wasn't just about the destruction of plants. It was about the violation of trust, the audacity to assume control over what was rightfully mine. My sanctuary had been invaded, and for the first time, the sense of security I had always felt on my property felt fragile, almost fragile enough to shatter completely. I stood there frozen, heart pounding, trying to make sense of it all. The world I had built quietly and patiently was being upended in an instant, and the person orchestrating it seemed completely unbothered by the chaos she caused. That moment, That impossible, surreal moment was the start of something I never expected, the beginning of a fight I hadn't asked for but now couldn't ignore. Every strike of the shovel, every footstep crushing my carefully arranged flowers, sent a pulse of anger through me that I hadn't felt before. I could almost hear the garden crying in protest, each broken stem and uprooted plant echoing the betrayal of trust I felt toward Karen. This wasn't a simple misunderstanding. This wasn't a momentary lapse of judgment. This was deliberate, calculated, a performance of dominance that she clearly believed she had every right to stage. Karen Wilson had always been the perfect neighbor in everyone's eyes. She was polite at gatherings, always impeccably dressed, quick with a smile and small talk that made her seem approachable. But that image had always been just that, an image. The mask slipped today, revealing her true colors. A woman who wielded authority like a weapon, using the rules she controlled as a shield to justify her own whims. Watching her now, directing neighbors as though she were conducting an orchestra of destruction, I realized that her carefully maintained reputation was a facade, a tool for exerting control without challenge. I felt my blood heat as I watched her smirk, the corners of her mouth curling with satisfaction, as if my outrage were a performance for her entertainment. Each laugh, each condescending glance was a small spark that fed a growing fire inside me. Hatred rose in me like a tide, surging, relentless, impossible to ignore. I wanted to scream, to make her feel even a fraction of the shock and indignation I had felt minutes ago. But I knew that raw outburst would not solve anything. It would only give her more of the show she seemed to crave. Instead, I let my mind sharpen, focusing on clarity and resolve. Every action she took was a message, a declaration that she could dominate and humiliate with impunity. But I was beginning to see the truth clearly. Her power was a construct, one that relied entirely on others' compliance and fear. Once I recognized that, the seeds of strategy began to form alongside my anger. My hatred wasn't mindless. It was purposeful. It demanded response, demanded recognition, demanded that I reclaim what was mine. Looking around at the ruined flower beds, the soil churned and littered with footprints. I made a mental inventory. Each damaged plant, each uprooted shrub became more than a symbol of loss. It became a marker of her arrogance, proof that her authority could be challenged. I imagined myself standing strong, countering her every move, ensuring that her assumptions about control and obedience would be upended. And yet, amid all the fury, I couldn't ignore the creeping disbelief that such brazen behavior could exist in a neighborhood I had always considered orderly and civil. Hatred mingled with a sense of responsibility. Responsibility not just to my garden, but to the principle that no one could simply decide that another person's property was theirs to manipulate at will. By the time the sun had climbed higher, I felt the full weight of it. This hatred was no longer a fleeting emotion. It was a compass pointing the way forward, giving me the focus I needed. I was determined to protect what was mine. Not out of spite, but out of justice. Every smirk, every laugh at my expense had done exactly what I feared. It had made my resolve unbreakable. Karen Wilson might have thought she could intimidate me, but in reality, she had only fueled the fire that would ultimately make me unstoppable. The moment I realized I couldn't let what had happened go unanswered, something inside me shifted. The shock and hatred I had felt before transformed into a purposeful, simmering rage. a force that demanded action. I wasn't going to stand by while my property, my sanctuary, was treated like a public playground for someone else's ego. This wasn't just about flowers or shrubs anymore. It was about respect, rights, and the principle that no one should feel entitled to violate another person's space. I started methodically. First, I contacted a lawyer who specialized in property disputes and HOA regulations. I explained everything, from the initial destruction to Karen's deliberate orchestration of the event. My lawyer's calm, professional approach helped channel my rage into strategy. Next, I filed an official complaint with the HOA, citing abuse of power, harassment, and property damage. I wasn't just venting. I was building a case that could not be ignored. Then came the collection of evidence. I combed through every detail of the morning, taking photographs of trampled flower beds, snapped branches, and footprints pressed into the soil. I reviewed videos from security cameras, catching Karen's precise movements, the way she directed neighbors with an almost theatrical authority. Each frame, each image, each note I took added fuel to the fire inside me. Rage sharpened into clarity. This was no longer a personal slight. It was a record of injustice, undeniable and factual. When the day arrived for the neighborhood meeting, I walked in with a calm exterior, though inside, my anger was a steady drumbeat. Karen was there too, the same poised, commanding figure she always presented. But something had changed. For the first time, she was on the defensive. The tables had turned, and my evidence left little room for her to manipulate or intimidate. Each time she attempted to justify her actions, to twist the narrative as she often did, I felt my rage rise. But now, it was constructive, a channel, not a destructive force. Every smirk, every practiced excuse only strengthened my resolve. The court followed soon after, and the intensity escalated. Sitting there, I could feel the years of pent-up frustration and injustice crystallizing into focused determination. I watched Karen's expression shift subtly, the confident mask faltering as my case laid bare the reality of her actions. It was a strange mix of satisfaction and tension. The rage inside me demanded recognition, but it was tempered by the knowledge that patience and precision were my allies. I realized then that rage, when directed with purpose, could become a weapon far stronger than anger alone. I wasn't seeking vengeance. I was seeking justice, and the process itself was empowering. With every document submitted, every witness statement gathered, and every argument made, I was reclaiming control over a situation that had initially felt entirely overwhelming. By the end of the hearings, my rage had evolved into unwavering resolve. Karen's authority, once untouchable in her eyes, had met its match in someone willing to confront it with truth and persistence. I had transformed the raw energy of anger into a strategic force, turning a moment of violation into a campaign for accountability. And in that transformation, I felt not only power, but a sense of inevitability. The final blow was coming, and justice would not be denied. The day the court delivered its decision felt surreal, almost like stepping out of a storm into clear sunlight. Every nerve in my body thrummed with anticipation as the judge's words echoed through the courtroom. Karen Wilson and her accomplices had been found in violation of the law. Their actions, trampling flower beds, destroying shrubs, and overstepping authority, were officially recognized as illegal. For the first time, the weight of vindication began to settle on my shoulders, a mix of relief, pride, and quiet triumph. Receiving compensation for the damage was more than just financial restitution. It was acknowledgement. Acknowledgement that my property, my effort, and my peace of mind mattered. The HOA itself, an organization that had once seemed untouchable, was now required to formally recognize my property rights. Rules that had previously been manipulated as tools of intimidation were now on the side of fairness and respect. It was a victory not only for me, but for anyone who might face similar abuses of authority in the future. Walking back to my home afterward, I couldn't help but glance at the garden. Though it had been battered, uprooted, and marred by reckless disregard, it now seemed to glow with a renewed sense of purpose. Every petal and leaf seemed to stand taller, almost defiantly, as if echoing the justice that had been delivered. The satisfaction I felt was not just personal, it was symbolic. My garden, once a target of arrogance, had become a testament to resilience. In the days that followed, I began restoring the damaged areas, carefully replanting flowers and tending to the soil. With each touch of my hands in the earth, the act felt less like repair and more like reclamation. The roses grew stronger, the tulips more vibrant, and even the jasmine seemed to lean into the sun with renewed vigor. It was a quiet celebration, a living reminder that patience, persistence, and steadfastness could withstand even the boldest attempts at intimidation. I often reflected on Karen's face in court, the shift from confidence to unease, the subtle faltering of the commanding mask she had always worn. It served as a reminder that power, when wielded without respect or accountability, is fragile. Even the most audacious attempts to dominate others can be met with resolve and consequence. Her actions, intended to assert control, had instead illuminated the limits of her authority and the strength of those willing to stand firm. The satisfaction I felt extended beyond legal victory. It was the knowledge that principles mattered, that effort and care could not be dismissed without consequence. My garden, restored and thriving, became more than just a patch of land. It was a symbol of perseverance, a declaration that respect for boundaries and property is non-negotiable. As the sun set over the yard, casting golden light across the vibrant blooms, I allowed myself a deep, contented breath. Justice had been served, not with cruelty or vindictiveness, but with clarity, fairness, and unwavering determination. In the end, the garden flourished again, stronger than ever, and I knew, with a sense of quiet satisfaction, that even the boldest Karens can be held accountable. The lessons of patience, resilience, and standing firm had been etched not only into the law, but into the living, breathing proof before me, my restored, flourishing sanctuary.